My husband told me he was leaving for New York for a 2-year work assignment. Enjoy the new story.
My husband of 7 years kissed me at the departure gate of Wilmington International Airport on a Sunday morning in April, told me he loved me, and walked towards security with a rolling suitcase and the olive green duffel bag I'd helped him pack the night before. He turned once, waved, mouthed the words again. "I love you." I waved back, tears running down my face, chin trembling, the whole performance. And it was a performance, because those tears were not sadness. They were 14 days of swallowed rage leaking out of me in the only way I could allow. I knew exactly where Mason Dunlap was going. I knew who was waiting for him in a 2-bedroom apartment on 5th Avenue in Park Slope, Brooklyn, with new throw pillows and a set of matching bath towels, and the $375,000 sitting in our joint savings account at Brunswick County Federal Credit Union had about 3 hours left before it disappeared from his reach forever. I'm Harper Pennington. I'm 33 years old. I work as a title examiner at Cape Fear Title and Escrow in Wilmington, North Carolina. And for the past 7 years, I believed I had a good marriage to a man named Mason Dunlap. Quiet, stable, maybe a little boring in that comfortable way marriages get when you've been together long enough to stop pretending you enjoy each other's taste in television. Mason was a project engineer, or so I thought, at Stanton and Murdoch, civil engineering. Good salary, predictable hours, the kind of job where you come home smelling like blueprint ink and complain about county permits over dinner. We bought our house on Bristow Lane in Leland 5 years ago, a 3-bedroom ranch with a screened-in porch and a magnolia tree in the front yard that drops leaves like it's getting paid by the pound. I found that house myself on Zillow, negotiated the asking price down $16,000, and handled every piece of closing paperwork personally. I do this for a living. I examine property documents, flag inconsistencies, catch fraud before it costs someone their home. I spent my days looking for lies hidden in legal language. Turns out I should have been looking at the lies hidden on my husband's laptop. 8 weeks before that airport goodbye, Mason came home on a Wednesday evening looking more excited than I'd seen him in years. He said Stanton and Murdoch had chosen him to lead a 2-year bridge rehabilitation project in the Bronx. It was a massive career opportunity, more responsibility, better pay, a chance to prove himself on a high-profile job. He'd be based in New York, and they'd set him up in company housing in Midtown. We talked it through like adults. I'd stay in Leland, keep working, and we'd see each other once a month. It was temporary. 2 years would fly by. I cried that night. Real tears. That time. I believed every word. Then came the Tuesday that changed everything. 14 days before Mason's scheduled departure, he went out for what he called a going-away dinner with his team. I was home alone, craving comfort food, and I wanted to print a chicken pot pie recipe I'd saved on Pinterest. My phone was charging in the bedroom, so I grabbed Mason's laptop off the kitchen counter. It was open, just sleeping. I tapped the trackpad. I was looking for a chicken pot pie recipe. What I got was the recipe for the end of my marriage. There was a minimized Chrome tab behind the browser window. I clicked it by accident. It was a street easy listing for a 2-bedroom apartment on 5th Avenue in Park Slope, Brooklyn. Hardwood floors, exposed brick, $3,400 a month. The move-in date was April 14th, the exact date Mason was supposed to leave for his assignment. My hands were already cold when I noticed the second tab, an open Gmail window, an email from someone named Cleo Marchetti. The subject line had a heart emoji, and the body of that email talked about our new place, the West Elm couch they'd picked out together, and how she, Cleo, could not wait to wake up next to him every single morning. I sat at that kitchen table for probably 4 minutes without moving, the laptop screen glowing in the dim kitchen, the pot pie recipe completely forgotten. My husband was not going to New York for work. He was going to New York to move in with another woman, and he'd looked me in the eyes over dinner, held my hand, and told me it was a career opportunity. Here's what I didn't do. I didn't scream. I didn't call him. I didn't throw anything. I work with documents. I examine evidence for a living. And every instinct I had told me the same thing. The person who has the paperwork wins. The person who reacts first loses leverage. I screenshotted everything. The Street Easy listing, the email, the Gmail account showing the sender's full name. I sent it all to my work email. Then I closed the tabs, put the laptop back exactly where it was, and opened Pinterest on my phone. I even printed the pot pie recipe, made it the next night, served it to Mason with a smile. Best pot pie I ever made. He said it was delicious. Over the next 14 days, I became someone I didn't recognize. I found Cleo Marchetti's Instagram, public, because of course it was. Photos with Mason going back 14 months, restaurants, weekend getaways, selfies on a rooftop somewhere with the Manhattan skyline behind them. One photo from 6 months ago stopped me cold. Cleo wearing a gold pendant I'd never seen. Caption reading, "Someone spoils me." I could see enough of the pendant to know it wasn't cheap. I mapped Mason's work trips against Cleo's posted locations. Charlotte in September, Cold Spring in November. They matched like puzzle pieces. I told no one, except Tess Calloway, my best friend and co-worker at Cape Fear Title. And even Tess got the minimum. I sat across from her in the break room and said, "I need you to trust me for about 2 weeks and not ask questions." Tess looked at me, looked at my face, and said, "Whatever you need." That's the kind of friend she is. Meanwhile, I opened a personal savings account at the credit union. I researched divorce attorneys. I read everything I could about North Carolina equitable distribution laws. I prepared, and then came the airport. I drove Mason to Wilmington International that Sunday morning, helped him load his bags, hugged him in the terminal, smelled his cologne, the Armani I'd bought him for our 5th anniversary, now permanently associated with someone who wasn't me. He squeezed my hand and told me 2 years would be over before we knew it. I nodded, cried, waved, watched him disappear past the TSA checkpoint. Then I walked to the parking lot, got in my car, and drove straight to Brunswick County Federal Credit Union. I didn't go home first. Home could wait. This couldn't. I walked into the branch on Midtown Drive, sat down with a banker I'd worked with before, a woman named Patricia who always kept butterscotch candies on her desk, and transferred $375,000 from our joint savings account into my new personal account. Every cent. Patricia processed it without blinking. I was a joint account holder. It was my legal right. Then the whole thing took 20 minutes. 20 minutes to move 7 years of savings and my grandmother's entire legacy. That money, $258,000 of it, came from my grandmother, Irene Pennington. She died 3 years ago and left it to me. Grandma Irene lived in a small clapboard house in Burgaw, North Carolina, drove the same Buick LeSabre for 19 years, and once drove 40 minutes round trip to save 11 cents on a can of green beans. That money was a lifetime of discipline and sacrifice, and I had deposited it into our joint savings account because I trusted my husband. Irene always told me, "Never leave your money where your husband can find it." I should have listened 20 minutes after the wedding instead of 7 years later. From the credit union, I drove to the office of Nadine Albrecht, a divorce attorney on Oleander Drive in Wilmington who a colleague had quietly recommended. Nadine was calm, direct, and had the kind of handshake that told you she didn't lose often. I filed a petition for divorce and an emergency motion to protect marital assets. Nadine didn't flinch at any of it. She'd seen worse. That was both comforting and deeply depressing. My third stop was a phone call from Nadine's parking lot. Vic Delmonico, private investigator. Nadine recommended him. I sent Vic everything. Mason's flight itinerary, Cleo Marchetti's full name, the Park Slope apartment address. Vic said he'd start Monday. I drove home after that, walked into the quiet house on Bristow Lane, set my keys on the counter right next to where Mason's laptop had been sitting 2 weeks earlier. For the first time in 14 days, I felt something other than dread. I felt in control. But I also knew this was just the beginning. I didn't yet know how deep Mason's lies actually went. I didn't know he'd been fired from his job 5 months earlier. I didn't know about the forged loan application. And I didn't know what role my mother-in-law, Corinne, had been playing behind my back for months. That part was coming. And it was worse than anything I'd imagined so far. Before we continue, do me a quick favor. Hit that like button, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. I read every single comment, and I love seeing where you all are. Thank you so much for your support. Mason called me his first evening in New York. He sounded upbeat, relaxed, like a man settling into an exciting new chapter. Told me the apartment was small but fine, that the team was already great, that the commute to the project site in the Bronx wasn't as bad as he'd expected. He said he missed me, said the bed felt too big without me in it. Every single word was a lie. The apartment wasn't company housing. It was the place he shared with Cleo Marchetti. There was no team, there was no project, and that bed he was sleeping in? It had a West Elm duvet that he and his girlfriend picked out together on a Saturday afternoon in Soho. But I played my part. I asked about his day, told him about a complicated title search at work, said I missed him too, said I loved him, hung up and sat on the edge of our bed, my bed now, staring at the wall, feeling like I'd swallowed a fistful of nails. I should have won an Oscar for those phone calls. Best actress in a long-distance marriage she'd already filed to end. Vic Delmonico started working on Monday and had results by Thursday. The man was efficient in a way that made you think he'd spent his military years doing exactly this kind of work, just in different countries. Within 5 days, I had my first batch of photos and documentation. Mason and Cleo, arm in arm, walking into a brownstone apartment building on 5th Avenue in Park Slope. Cleo carrying a reusable grocery bag from Key Food on 7th Avenue. Enough food for two. A shot of the building's intercom panel showing Dunlap/Marchetti. On the buzzer for apartment 3R. Mason's name was on the lease. He wasn't visiting. He lived there. But the photos weren't the worst part. Vic checked employment records next. Public filings, company directories, professional licensing databases, and what he found made my stomach drop through the floor. Mason did not work for Stanton and Murdoch Civil Engineering. His name wasn't in the company directory. His professional engineering license hadn't been renewed. Vic's contact at the firm confirmed it quietly. Mason Dunlap had not been employed there for months. There was no bridge project in the Bronx. There was no 2-year assignment. The entire story was fabricated from scratch. My husband wasn't just cheating on me. He was unemployed and hiding it. The man who kissed me goodbye at the airport and told me his career was taking off didn't have a career at all. I spent that weekend going through every financial document I could access, with Nadine's guidance on what to look for. Mason's personal credit card statements and checking account told a story that went back 14 months, the entire length of his relationship with Cleo. The numbers were specific because fraud always is. A $4,200 charge at Tiffany & Co's in Charlotte. That was the gold pendant I'd seen on Cleo's Instagram, the one captioned, "Someone spoils me." A $2,800 weekend at a bed and breakfast called Riverview Manor in Cold Spring, New York, a little Hudson Valley town I'd never been to. Booked on the same weekend, Mason told me he was inspecting a project site in Fayetteville. Monthly Venmo payments to an account that traced back to Cleo. $400, $500, sometimes $700 labeled dinner or groceries, or just a smiley face. $22,400 over 14 months. I used to think those mystery Venmo payments were his fantasy football league. Turns out the only fantasy was the entire life he was pretending to live. Then came the phone call that cracked the whole thing open even wider. Week 3, a Wednesday afternoon. I was at work when my cell rang. A Wilmington area code I didn't recognize. The voice on the other end introduced himself as Christian Ainsley, a project director at Stanton and Murdoch. He was looking for Mason. The company needed a laptop and a set of project binders returned. They'd been trying to reach Mason for months, and his phone went straight to voicemail. I kept my voice steady. Told Christian I thought Mason was in New York on an assignment for the firm. There was a pause, a long one. Then Christian said, very carefully, that there was no New York assignment. Mason had been terminated from Stanton and Murdoch 5 months ago. The reason, and Christian was clearly choosing his words, involved discrepancies in expense documentation. He assumed Mason had found work elsewhere. I thanked him, hung up, sat at my desk for a full minute without blinking. 5 months. Mason had pretended to go to work every single day for 5 months. That's over 100 mornings of putting on a button-down shirt, grabbing his laptop bag, kissing me goodbye at the front door, and driving to, where? A Panera Bread on Market Street? The parking lot of a Target? I still don't know where he went during those months, and honestly, I don't want to. The point is, he did it. 150-something days of walking out that door and lying to my face, and I never suspected a thing. That's either the greatest acting performance in the history of Brunswick County, or I was more trusting than any person should ever be. Probably both. That same week, something else happened that I almost missed. I called Corinne, Mason's mother, to keep up appearances. Standard check-in. I mentioned Mason was settling in fine, that he seemed busy with work. Corinne was unusually warm, chatty, almost cheerful, and then she said something that stopped me mid-sentence. Oh, good. Is he near that big park? He always did love being around green spaces. I hadn't mentioned any park. Mason's cover story placed him in company housing in Midtown Manhattan. There is no big park in Midtown, not the kind you'd casually reference, but Prospect Park, one of the biggest parks in Brooklyn, is 3 blocks from the apartment Mason shares with Cleo in Park Slope. Corinne couldn't know that detail unless she knew about the real apartment, unless she'd seen the Street Easy listing, or talked to Mason about the neighborhood, or helped him choose it. She caught herself immediately. Oh, or wherever he said he is. I always get these things mixed up. But the damage was done. You don't accidentally reference the specific geography of a neighborhood you've never heard of. Being betrayed by a husband, that's a kind of pain I was learning to carry. But finding out that his mother knew, that Corinne Dunlap, who'd sat across from me at Thanksgiving dinner 6 months ago and asked me to pass the cranberry sauce, had been helping her son plan his escape to another woman's apartment, that was a wound in a place I didn't know I had. I didn't say anything. I filed it away, same as everything else. The evidence was building, and I wasn't done collecting it yet. That Friday night, I broke. Tess came over with a bottle of Pinot Grigio and a bag of takeout from the Thai place on College Road. I sat at the kitchen table and told her everything, all of it. The laptop, the emails, Cleo, the fake job, Christian Ainsley's phone call, Corinne's slip, the PI reports, the money I'd already moved. Tess listened without interrupting, which, if you know Tess, is a miracle in itself. When I finished, she set down her wine glass and looked at me with the expression of a woman who'd survived her own divorce 18 months earlier and had 0 patience left for unfaithful husbands. "Let me get this straight," she said. "The man cannot parallel park his own truck, and you're telling me he ran a double life for 14 months? That's the most impressive thing he's ever done, and it's still pathetic." I laughed. It hurt, but I laughed. Sometimes your best friend's job isn't to make you feel better. It's to make you feel less alone. 2 days later, Vic sent me the first full report. A thick folder, printed, organized, tabbed. Photos, financial records, a complete timeline of Mason's double life laid out week by week. 14 months of deception, documented with the precision of a man who used to do this for the military. I was flipping through it at the kitchen table when Vic called. "Harper, there's one more thing," he said. I pulled county records. 4 months ago, somebody applied for a $150,000 home equity line of credit on your property on Bristow Lane. Both names are on the application, yours and Mason's. Did you sign anything like that? I had not. I had never signed any HELOC application. I had never discussed a HELOC with Mason. I had never even considered borrowing against our home, which meant Mason had forged my signature on a $150,000 loan application against the house I found, negotiated, and closed on myself. The affair was devastating. The unemployment lie was humiliating. But this was fraud, and it changed everything. The next morning, I went into Mason's home office, the room where he'd spent 5 months working from home after secretly being fired, and went through his filing cabinet. It was mostly junk, old tax returns, instruction manuals for appliances we didn't own anymore, a warranty card for a lawnmower we sold 2 years ago. But in the back of the bottom drawer, tucked inside a folder labeled Insurance, I found it. A denial letter from Southeast Coastal Bank dated 4 months earlier. Application for a home equity line of credit, $150,000. Property address, 14 Bristow Lane, Leland, North Carolina. Applicants Mason R. Dunlap and Harper E. Pennington. Both signatures at the bottom, except I'd never signed it. I pulled the letter out and looked at the signature. Then I looked at it again. 12 years of examining title documents has trained my eyes to notice things most people wouldn't. A slant that's slightly off, a letter formation that doesn't match, a stroke that hesitates where it shouldn't. Mason's forgery of my signature wasn't terrible, but it wasn't good either. He got the H in Harper wrong. The crossbar was too high, and the tail curved the wrong direction. It looked like a drunk flamingo trying to do calligraphy. The bank's verification team caught the discrepancy between this signature and the one they had on file from our mortgage closing, and they denied the application. That denial saved us $150,000 in debt that Mason would have used to fund his new life with Cleo. I called Nadine immediately. She was quiet for about 5 seconds after I described the letter. And if you know Nadine Albrecht, 5 seconds of silence means she's already 3 moves ahead. She told me this was a game changer. Forging a spouse's signature on a financial application isn't just grounds for an unfavorable divorce settlement, it's potentially criminal, bank fraud, document forgery. And more importantly for our case, it proved premeditation. Mason didn't wake up one day and decide to leave. He'd been planning to extract money from our life together for months, trying different methods. When the HELOC failed, he invented the fake work assignment as Plan B. When Plan B got him to New York, Plan C was to slowly drain the $375,000 in joint savings by calling me every few weeks with excuses about project expenses and equipment deposits, manipulating me into approving transfers myself. That was his strategy. And it wasn't stupid. It might have worked if I hadn't found that laptop 2 weeks too early. Here's what keeps me up at night sometimes: the timing. Mason was planning to start requesting money from the joint savings around month 2 or 3. Small amounts first, $5,000 here, $8,000 there, with plausible work-related reasons. He figured I'd trust him. I always had before. If I hadn't opened that laptop on a random Tuesday evening in search of a pot pie recipe, I would have been sitting at home right now, wiring money to a man who was spending it on another woman's rent. I moved the $375,000 about 5 weeks before Mason planned to touch it. 5 weeks. That's how close it was. VIX reports from New York were painting a picture of a man running out of time and money simultaneously. Mason had left North Carolina with roughly $11,000 in his personal checking account, what was left after 14 months of funding an affair and 5 months of having no paycheck at all. In New York, with rent at $3,400 a month, plus utilities, groceries, Metro cards, and the cost of keeping up appearances for Cleo, he was burning through cash like a campfire in a windstorm. Vic noticed the shift in their routine. Early on, Mason and Cleo went to restaurants 2 or 3 times a week, a trattoria on 7th Avenue, a cocktail bar on Bergen Street. By week 3, it was mostly takeout containers from a Chinese place on Flatbush. No more weekend outings, no more gifts. Mason was stretching every dollar, waiting for the moment he could start accessing the big account, the $375,000 that wasn't there anymore. Meanwhile, Nadine was building something I can only describe as a legal fortress. She filed the petition for divorce, the emergency motion to freeze remaining marital assets, and a formal notification to the court about the HELOC forgery, with the denial letter and signature comparison attached. She also prepared for what she expected Mason to do the moment he found out about the money. He's going to file a motion to get it back, Nadine told me during our meeting that week. The money was in a joint account. He'll argue you removed it unilaterally without his consent, and he'll have a legal point. Joint account means joint ownership. I felt a chill when she said that. I'd assumed moving the money put me in the clear. Nadine saw my face and held up a hand. He has an argument. We have a better one. $258,000 of that money is your inheritance, traceable to Irene Pennington's estate through probate records. It's separate property that was commingled into a joint account, but it's still identifiable and still yours. The transfer was a protective measure by a spouse who discovered her partner had forged her signature on a 6-figure loan application, concealed a job termination, abandoned the marital home, and was cohabiting with a third party. Any judge in this county will see it our way, but I want to be honest with you. He is going to fight, and it won't feel good when he does. I appreciated that honesty. Nadine never sugarcoated anything, and in those weeks, I needed reality more than comfort. That evening, after Nadine's meeting, I sat in the living room with a cup of tea and looked at the framed photo of Grandma Irene on the bookshelf. It was taken at her kitchen table in Burgaw, North Carolina, the same table where she taught me to play gin rummy when I was 9. Irene Pennington lived in a 1,200 square foot clapboard house with a vegetable garden and a screen door that never closed right. She drove the same champagne-colored Buick LeSabre for 19 years, rotated her tires religiously, and once drove 40 minutes to a Piggly Wiggly in Atkinson because their canned green beans were 11 cents cheaper than the Food Lion in Burgaw. That's who she was. Every dollar she saved was a brick in the foundation she left behind, and that $258,000, her entire life's discipline compressed into a number, was sitting safely in my personal account instead of funding Mason Dunlap's Brooklyn love nest. Grandma Irene would have had a few choice words for Mason, and none of them would have been printable on a church bulletin. The pieces were coming together. I had the PI documentation of the affair. I had proof Mason was fired for falsifying expense reports. I had proof the New York assignment was fabricated. I had $22,400 in documented affair spending. I had the forged HELOC application. And I had Corinne slip about the park, not enough to prove her involvement in court, but enough for me to know. But Mason still didn't know any of this. He still called every few days, keeping up his performance, telling me about the project and how the team was progressing. I played along every single time, my voice steady, my words warm, while my phone silently recorded every conversation. North Carolina is a one-party consent state, meaning I only needed my own permission to record. And Mason, in his confidence that I was still the trusting wife waiting patiently at home, kept talking, kept lying, kept handing me evidence without realizing it. I needed to keep this performance going a little longer, because the moment Mason discovered the money was gone, the clock would start ticking. He'd panic, he'd make moves, he'd probably hire an attorney and fight back. And I wanted every single piece of evidence locked down, organized, and in Nadine's hands before that clock started. The question wasn't if he'd find out, it was when, and what he'd do when he did. I didn't have to wait long. By week 4, the phone calls from New York were getting shorter. Mason used to call every evening. Full conversations, 20 minutes, sometimes 30. By the end of the month, it was every 3 or 4 days, and the calls lasted maybe 8 minutes. He sounded distracted, rushed. The project was keeping him busy, he said. Big deadlines coming up. I played along, same as always. Asked about his day, told him about mine, said I loved him before hanging up. But the effort of pretending was wearing me down to the bone. Each phone call felt like swallowing glass and smiling while you did it. At this point, I was so good at faking a happy marriage that I started wondering if I missed my calling entirely. Forget title examiner. I could have been a CIA operative, or at least one of those people on cooking competition shows who taste something terrible and smile for the camera like it's the best meal of their lives. But I held on. Because Nadine had the motions filed, Vic had the evidence compiled, and the process server was standing by in Brooklyn waiting for the green light. Everything was timed. We just needed Mason to stay confident a little longer. He stayed confident for exactly 5 weeks. On a Tuesday evening in mid-May, week 5, Mason tried to log into our joint savings account from his phone. According to what I learned later, he was preparing to start the next phase of his plan. He needed money. His personal checking was down to about $3,000, and New York City does not care about your budget. He was going to call me that week with a story about needing $7,500 for equipment rental on the project, the first of what he planned to be a series of requests, each one a little bigger than the last, each one with a perfectly reasonable work-related excuse. He never got to make that call. He opened the banking app, tapped on the joint savings account, and saw a number he was not expecting. $0.00. Available balance. $0.00. He refreshed the page, refreshed it again, closed the app and reopened it, called the bank's customer service line. The representative confirmed what the screen was telling him. The funds had been transferred out by the joint account holder, Harper Pennington, 5 weeks earlier. The money had been gone since the day he left. He just never checked. Mason called me. I didn't answer. He called again, and again, and again. 17 missed calls in 2 hours. Then the texts started. Harper, what happened to the savings? Followed by, Harper, pick up the phone. Then, this isn't funny, call me back. 17 missed calls. That man hadn't called me 17 times in the last 7 years of our marriage combined. Not on my birthday, not on our anniversary, not even when he backed his truck into our mailbox and needed help filing the insurance claim, but threatened his access to $375,000. And suddenly, I'm the most important person on earth. I sat on the couch with a cup of chamomile tea, watched the notifications pile up on my screen, and didn't move. That evening, after the 17th missed call, I called Nadine. She'd had a process server on retainer in Brooklyn for 2 weeks, waiting for exactly this moment. He knows, I told her. Good, she said. We go tomorrow morning. The next morning, the server arrived at the apartment on 5th Avenue in Park Slope. Mason opened the door, probably expecting a DoorDash delivery. Instead, he received a manila envelope containing a petition for divorce, an emergency motion to protect marital assets, and a formal notice advising his legal counsel to contact the law office of Nadine Albrecht in Wilmington, North Carolina. Vic was parked across the street in a rented Nissan, documenting the whole thing. 2 hours after being served, Mason finally reached me. I answered this time, because I wanted him on the record. He was furious, panicked, cycling between threats and desperation like a man trying to steer a car with no brakes. He told me I had no right to take that money. I told him, calmly, that $258,000 of it was my inheritance, and the remainder was subject to equitable distribution under North Carolina law, and that he should speak with an attorney. That made him angrier. He said he was going to come back and sort this out, said I was overreacting, said this was not how adults handle things. I could feel the rage coming through the phone like heat from an open oven, and I let him talk, because he kept saying things he shouldn't have. He mentioned the apartment, my apartment that I'm paying for. He mentioned Cleo by name. Cleo has nothing to do with this. And then the line that Nadine would later circle in red ink on the transcript. I need that money for rent, Harper. Do you understand that? You know that feeling when someone shows you exactly who they are and you realize you've been editing them in your head for years, cleaning up the rough edges, rounding off the sharp parts, giving them the benefit of every doubt. That phone call was the moment every edited version of Mason Dunlap collapsed, and the real version, the one who'd lied to me every day for over a year, who'd forged my name, who was now screaming at me because I'd protected my own grandmother's money, that version was ugly. I hung up and forwarded the recording to Nadine. One-party consent, every word admissible, but Mason wasn't done. I need to be clear about this. He was not a stupid man, and he did not give up. He flew back to North Carolina 2 days later, found a budget attorney from a small firm near the Brunswick County Courthouse, a guy named Lester, something who handled mostly DUI cases and property disputes, and filed an emergency motion to compel me to return the $375,000 to a court-controlled escrow account. His argument: the funds were in a joint account. I removed them unilaterally without his knowledge or consent, and I had no right to take all of it regardless of the source. And here's the thing. He had a point. Legally, a joint account belongs to both parties. Mason had standing to challenge what I'd done, and when Nadine called me to tell me about his motion, I felt real fear for the first time since this started. What if the court agreed with him? What if I had to put the money back? Nadine told me to breathe. She'd been preparing for this exact move since day one. The hearing was short, held in a conference room at the Brunswick County Courthouse, not a dramatic courtroom, just a judge, a clerk, 2 attorneys, and 2 people who used to share a bed and a mortgage. Nadine presented her argument with the precision of a surgeon. $258,000 was traceable separate property, inherited from the estate of Irene Pennington. Probate records attached. The transfer was a protective action by a spouse who had discovered that her husband forged her signature on a $150,000 HELOC application. Denial letter and signature comparison entered into evidence. Additionally, Mason had concealed his termination from employment, abandoned the marital home to cohabitate with a third party, and the recorded phone call demonstrated his intent to use joint savings for personal expenses related to the affair. Mason's attorney didn't have a counter for the HELOC forgery. That was the piece that broke his case. You can argue about joint accounts all day long, but when one spouse has forged the other's signature on a six-figure loan application, credibility evaporates. The judge denied Mason's motion. The $375,000 stayed with me pending full equitable distribution. Mason's attorney packed up his briefcase so fast I thought the zipper was going to break. You know a case is bad when even the lawyer wants to leave the room before the air clears. Mason walked out of that courthouse with nothing. No money, no job, no legal leverage. He checked into a weekly rate motel off US 17 near Supply. $40 a night. The kind of place where the ice machine hasn't worked since the second Bush administration. But the story wasn't over, because two people were about to make moves that Mason never saw coming, and both of them were going to make his situation significantly worse. One was a 29-year-old marketing coordinator in Brooklyn who just started Googling her boyfriend's name. The other was his own mother. While Mason was sitting in a motel room in Supply, North Carolina, trying to figure out how his plan had collapsed, the dominoes were still falling, just in places he wasn't looking. Back in Brooklyn, Cleo Marchetti's life was unraveling in a different way. Mason had left abruptly, told her there was a legal emergency back home involving a property dispute with his ex-wife. He promised he'd be back in a week. That was 2 weeks ago. The rent was due, and Mason had stopped returning her calls with any consistency. When he did pick up, he sounded angry, distracted, and nothing like the confident, successful man she'd been living with. Cleo was not the kind of woman who sat around waiting for answers. She was a marketing coordinator at a branding agency in Soho. She researched things for a living. So one evening after work, alone in the apartment that suddenly felt very empty, she opened her laptop and typed Mason's full name into a search bar. What she found took less than 5 minutes. The North Carolina Public Records Portal, where marriage, divorce, and property records are searchable by anyone, showed a marriage certificate for Mason R. Dunlap and Harper E. Pennington, filed 7 years ago in Brunswick County. No corresponding divorce record, no separation filing until 6 weeks earlier. He was never divorced. He was never separated. The entire 14 months of their relationship was built on a lie he told her on their second date and never corrected. Cleo kept digging. She searched for Mason's name in connection with Stanton and Murdoch Civil Engineering. No current listing, no professional license renewal, no LinkedIn activity in months. The great career and big new position he'd described to her, another fabrication. The man she'd been sharing a bed with, the man she'd rearranged her entire life around, had no job, a wife in North Carolina, and roughly $3,000 to his name. What happened next was something I genuinely did not expect. Cleo found me on LinkedIn. My profile was professional and public, title examiner at Cape Fear Title, and escrow, Wilmington, North Carolina. She sent me a message. It was short, direct, and clearly written by someone who was shaking while they typed it. She introduced herself, said she'd been seeing Mason for 14 months, said she was told he was divorced, said she just discovered that was a lie, said she was sorry. And then she said she had something I might want to see. She sent screenshots, dozens of them, messages Mason had sent her over the past year, carefully saved in the way you save messages from someone you love and trust. The divorce is almost finalized, just waiting on one more signature. We're selling the house. Should close by end of next month. I've got a new position lined up in the city. Better money, better title. My ex and I are on good terms. She's moved on. I've moved on. It's all very civilized. Every single line was a provable, documentable lie. And together, they told a story that was even worse than what I'd already uncovered, because they showed premeditation. Mason hadn't just drifted into an affair. He'd been constructing a parallel reality for over a year, telling Cleo the house was being sold, the divorce was final, the career was flourishing. He was building toward a moment where he could disappear into his new life and leave the old one behind completely. Now, Nadine nearly fell out of her chair when I showed her the screenshots. "This is intent," she said. "This is a man who told his girlfriend he was selling your house. This is gold." Here's what I didn't expect to feel: sympathy for Cleo. She didn't know. She thought she was building a life with a divorced man who had a clean slate and a good job. Instead, she got the same Mason I got, just with a fresher coat of paint and a better opening pitch. I didn't respond to her message, but I didn't block her either. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is just let something be. Meanwhile, 300 miles south, Corinne Dunlap was having a crisis of her own, and it had nothing to do with guilt. Corinne owned Tidewaters, a gift boutique on the main street in Southport, North Carolina. Southport is small, the kind of small where the woman who sells you scented candles on Saturday is the same woman sitting behind you at church on Sunday. Reputation is currency in a town like that, and Corinne had spent 20 years building hers. When she learned, through Mason, during one of his increasingly desperate phone calls, that the HELOC forgery had been flagged in the court filing and could be referred for criminal review, something shifted inside Corinne Dunlap, not toward remorse, toward self-preservation. If Mason's fraud became a criminal matter, anyone connected to his planning could be questioned, and Corinne had helped him find the apartment. She'd browsed Street Easy listings with him. She knew about Cleo. She knew the work assignment was a cover story. If that came out in a small town like Southport, her boutique, her social standing, her entire carefully maintained life would crumble. So Corinne did what Corinne does best. She protected herself. She called Nadine Albrecht's office, not to apologize, not to explain, to offer a written statement confirming what she knew, that Mason had told her he was moving to New York to live with another woman, that she had helped him search for apartments online, and that Mason had described his plan as getting settled first and figuring out the money situation later. She threw her own son under the bus, signed her name at the bottom, and walked away clean. Corinne Dunlap spent 7 years telling me my pot roast was too dry, and now she was serving her own son on a platter, medium rare, no seasoning, with a side of legal documentation. When Mason found out, when he called his mother begging for help, maybe a place to stay, maybe a loan, Corinne told him she couldn't be involved, said she couldn't have that kind of situation associated with her shop, said he'd made his choices and needed to live with them. The man who thought he'd fooled everyone, his wife, his girlfriend, his employer, his mother, was now standing in the middle of a collapsed life with nobody left. His wife had outsmarted him. His girlfriend had found the truth. His mother had chosen her candle shop over her only son, and the court had denied his one legal move. 2 weeks later, we ended it. Not in a courtroom, not with speeches or dramatics or a gallery full of spectators. It ended in a conference room at Nadine Albrecht's office on Oleander Drive, a rectangular table, 4 chairs, a water pitcher nobody touched, and a manila folder. 4 people. Me, Nadine, Mason, his attorney, the DUI guy from near the courthouse who looked like he'd rather be literally anywhere else. Nadine slid the folder across the table. Inside was everything. PI photographs and surveillance logs, Cleo Marchetti's screenshots showing 14 months of premeditated lies, the HELOC denial letter with the forged signature and a professional handwriting comparison, termination documentation from Stanton and Murdoch, confirmed by Christian Ainsley, Corinne Dunlap's signed statement, a transcript of Mason's recorded phone call, the one where he said he needed the savings for rent. Mason's attorney opened the folder. He read slowly, page by page, for what felt like 10 minutes, but was probably 7. The room was completely silent. I could hear the air conditioning humming through the ceiling vent. When he finished, he leaned over to Mason and spoke quietly. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see Mason's face, and I watched something drain out of it. Not anger, not defiance, something deeper. The last flicker of the belief that he could still talk his way out of this. The separation agreement was straightforward. I retained the $258,000 as traceable separate property, Grandma Irene's inheritance, documented through probate records. The remaining $117,000 in joint savings was divided 75 to 25 under equitable distribution, approximately $88,000 to me, approximately $29,000 to Mason, reflecting his documented fraud, concealed unemployment, abandonment of the marital home, and dissipation of marital trust. I kept the house on Bristow Lane. Mason had abandoned it, and the HELOC forgery destroyed any claim he might have had. The forgery itself remained available for the district attorney's office to review at their discretion. Mason picked up the pen, signed his name on every flagged line. His attorney gathered the papers, shook Nadine's hand out of professional habit, and left without looking back. No speech, no confrontation, no satisfaction the way movies promise it. Just the sound of a pen scratching paper, and then silence, and then it was over. I thought I'd feel triumphant walking out of that room, or at least relieved, but mostly I felt tired, the kind of tired that comes from carrying someone else's lies for longer than you realized, and finally, setting them down. Tess was waiting in the parking lot, leaning against her car with 2 coffees from the Port City Java on Market Street. She didn't ask how it went. She could see it on my face. She handed me a cup and said, "So, what do you want for dinner? Because I'm thinking we've earned sushi." I laughed, really laughed. The first honest one in months. If you've made it this far, you are truly one of my people. From the bottom of my heart. If this story meant something to you, please hit that like button, subscribe, and drop me a comment. You have no idea how much it means when I see your words come through. Every single one. Thank you. Now, let me tell you how this ends. 3 months after Mason Dunlap signed that separation agreement, I was standing in my bedroom on Bristow Lane with a roller brush in my hand and sage green paint on my forearms. The gray walls were Mason's choice. He said gray was modern and clean, which is exactly what a man with no imagination says when you ask him to pick a color. The sage green was mine. I picked it from a swatch at the Sherwin-Williams on Eastwood Road, and I painted every wall myself on a Saturday afternoon with the windows open and Fleetwood Mac playing loud enough for the neighbors to hear. The house looked different, felt different. Not because of the paint, because of what was missing. Mason's boots weren't by the back door. His jacket wasn't on the hook in the hallway. His laptop wasn't on the kitchen counter. Every trace of him was packed into 4 cardboard boxes in the garage. Waiting for him to arrange a pickup he kept postponing. I got a promotion at Cape Fear Title, Senior Title Examiner, a position my boss had been hinting at for a year but officially offered the week after the settlement. She told me she was impressed by how I'd handled everything. Professionally, she meant. But I think she also meant the other thing. The thing everyone at the office knew about but was too polite to mention directly. And I adopted a dog, a 3-legged beagle mix from the Brunswick County Animal Shelter, 4 years old, missing his front left leg from a car accident as a puppy, and absolutely fearless about everything except the vacuum cleaner. I named him Hank. Hank is missing a leg and still has more backbone than my ex-husband. He greets me at the door every single day when I come home from work, which is already a significant upgrade over the previous occupant of this house. I also started putting $200 a month into a separate brokerage account. Nothing fancy. Just an index fund, automatic transfers, the kind of boring financial habit that doesn't make anyone's heart race, but builds something real over time. Grandma Irene's rule, always pay yourself first. I should have started listening to that woman a lot sooner. The $258,000, Irene's money, sits in my account, untouched. The additional $88,000 from the settlement is there too. The house is mine, free from any claim, and the mortgage is manageable on my salary alone. For the first time in a long time, I know exactly where I stand. No surprises, no hidden accounts, no signatures I didn't write. As for Mason, I'll keep this brief because he doesn't deserve more of this story than he's already taken. He's living in a rental apartment in Charlotte, about 20 minutes south of here. The motel got too expensive, even at $40 a night. He has roughly $18,000 left from his share of the settlement after attorney fees. No job. Though I heard through the small-town grapevine that he applied for a project coordinator position at a construction firm in Myrtle Beach. The district attorney's office in Brunswick County opened a preliminary inquiry into the HELOC forgery. I don't know where that will lead, and frankly, it's not my problem anymore. Corinne still runs Tidewaters in Southport, still sells lavender sachets and monogrammed hand towels to tourists. She and Mason don't speak. The woman who helped him plan his escape to Brooklyn decided her candle shop was worth more than her relationship with her son. I'd feel sorry for Mason about that, except I don't. Cleo sent me one last message about a month after everything settled. It was short and sincere. She said she was sorry for her part in it, even though she didn't know. Said she hoped I was doing well. I read it, sat with it for a minute, and closed the app. I didn't respond, but I didn't block her. Some things don't need a reply to be understood. Last week, I was sitting at the kitchen table, the same table where I found Mason's laptop, the same table where I sat with Tess and a bottle of wine, the same table where I made 3 stops in one afternoon and changed the entire direction of my life. Hank was asleep on the floor next to my chair with his one front paw twitching in some dream I'll never know about. The windows were open. The magnolia tree was doing its thing, dropping leaves everywhere as usual. And I thought about the woman who stood in that airport terminal back in April, tears on her face, waving goodbye to a man who didn't deserve the wave. That woman was already fighting. She just hadn't let anyone see it yet. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. If you want another story that'll grab you from the very first sentence, one is already waiting on your screen. Just tap it, and I'll see you right there. Take care of yourselves. I mean that.